Hello, I'm Osmanqizi. You're watching Osmanqizi TV. Azerbaijan has signed a declaration on allied cooperation with Russia. What does it mean? What does it change? We're going to be discussing this with the former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan and Bosnia, Richard Kozlaric. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining our program.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was planning to do this interview with you on the 30th anniversary of Azerbaijan's independence, Azerbaijan establishing diplomatic relations with the United States, but 2/22/22 came and everything has changed. Azerbaijan signed allied cooperation declaration with Russia. Your reaction, your take on that?
Well, I think as someone who's been watching Azerbaijan's engagement internationally for over 30 years, I've never seen an event so strikingly out of sync with what's going on in the world than the signing of this document. President Aliyev and President Putin, literally on the same day, if not the day after, Russia again invades Ukraine and recognizes the independence of two separatist regions in Ukraine. The optics of this, just given the reaction of the international community to what Russia has done, the imposition of sanctions almost immediately by the United States, the EU, Japan, on Russia for this invasion, and then there's this document signing, which I've looked at the provisions. I think there are several of them that are very troubling in terms of Azerbaijan's sovereignty, I think you're right to remind us that this is 30 years after Azerbaijan, became independent, recognized that the U.S. and other countries recognized that independence, and yet it would appear to me, this is my interpretation, that Azerbaijan has given up some of that sovereignty to Russia in terms of the agreement that was signed.
Well, it came as a shock for the Azeri public. Neither the signing of the declaration, nor the very fact that the Azerbaijani president and vice president,
yes,
who happens to be his wife, Mehribanova, will be visiting Moscow, have never been confirmed by official sources in Azerbaijan. And yet this happened. Now, what does it, you said that there are some troublesome, what worrying do you find in this declaration? Why do you think that what do you think it will mean for the sovereignty of Azerbaijan?
Well, I don't have the text of the document in front of me, and I'm trying to remember the number. I think it was like Article 7, but basically had the two countries agreeing that in the event that a relationship between one of the parties and a third party, and by that I interpret it to mean either a country or an international organization such as NATO, if one of the two parties, Russia or Azerbaijan, saw that as a problem, they could essentially veto that relationship as damaging the agreement that was signed yesterday. That's quite a remarkable provision. I've never seen anything like that in any international agreement that I'm familiar with, because what it means is that virtually anything that Azerbaijan does from this point out is subject to review in Moscow. And if they want to establish diplomatic relations with a country or expand relationships with an international organization, say like NATO, that Russia could object and cite the agreement that Aliyev and Putin signed yesterday. I find that disturbing. Now, there's a lot of other things in the agreement that cover, normal relationships in the economic, social, cultural area. But it's these, the idea that you're giving up, the ability to do what you as a sovereign country want to do without first having the approval of the other party in this agreement. I can't imagine Azerbaijan questioning Russian relationships with any organization or country, but I can't imagine Russia questioning Azerbaijan's relationships with NATO, with the EU, conceivably even with the US.
So what do you think, which areas do you think it can be applied to, this vetoing, apart from NATO, which is obvious?
I mean,
NATO
is the most obvious example, given everything that's been going on over the last months about Russia, Putin concerned about Ukraine and NATO, and the very strong position that Putin has asserted that there can be no further expansion of NATO anywhere in Europe, and that includes what I call the former Soviet space. So the second area where it could happen is in terms of the EU. It's not clear to me that given the sanctions that have been imposed by Europe as well as the US, that any decision, I don't know if this would come about, but maybe Azerbaijan wants to finally expand its relationship with the EU. Russia could oppose that as well. And I think one thing we really have to keep in mind in all this is kind of in the background of the bilateral agreement as such. All of these sanctions that the U.S. and others are imposing on Russia could have an impact on Azerbaijan because of the deep economic relationships between Azerbaijani companies and the government, the state oil company, with Russian entities. Now, we don't know just how far those sanctions will go, but there could be another area where if for whatever reason Azerbaijan would say, well, we're going to honor these sanctions, whatever those might be, then Russia could say, no, that's an unfriendly step, and you can't do that without violating our bilateral agreement. I'm not sure at the end of all of this what Azerbaijan thought it was getting from putting itself in this horrible position in terms of how this is seen internationally. Was there some commitment about transportation links? I know there are a lot of very familiar language that we've seen also in the Turkish agreement about transportation within the region. Whether there was some back channel commitment about the rest of Nagorno-Karabakh, where the Russian peacekeeping operators are. I don't know. Maybe there was some, that might be something that Azerbaijan felt it was getting, but I don't know. I don't know how President Aliyev can trust anything that Putin says, quite frankly. After everything we've seen in the last 2 weeks, there is no way that I would take anything that he would say, either in public or private, as being a binding commitment.
Well, it is fair to say what Aliyev thinks, because obviously it's shocking news for Azerbaijan. There were no public discussions on the upcoming visit or on the upcoming mutual declaration. So it is completely new for the public of Azerbaijan. So this is something that has been probably going on between the governments, Putin and Aliyev in Azerbaijan. Ilham Aliyev himself said at the press briefing that we've been going towards this, we've been working on this for over a year now. Again, no public discussion whatsoever. Right. But what do you think it gives to Putin's government, especially given the timing, in the middle of the Ukraine crisis?
Well, I think it gives, to me, what it gives is, here's somebody, President Ilham Aliyev from a neighboring country who's prepared to enter into an agreement with Putin at the time when the U.S. and other countries are, breaking off contacts, applying sanctions to Russia because of Ukraine. And so I think that, that for Putin, it's public relations to show the rest of the world that he's not alone, that he still is able to operate, not not through military force, but through diplomacy with relations with neighboring countries like Azerbaijan. But beyond that, I don't think there's anything. Well, again, just looking at the agreement as I did, I didn't see anything particularly beneficial, if you will, to Putin that he didn't have already from the agreement. So I think it was more, on the Azerbaijani end of things, if there was going to be a plus or a minus. I think from Putin's side, it was a visual that he wanted to have at this time. And I don't, I'm not informed enough to know what the connection might be, but, it wasn't that long ago that Aliyev went to Kiev, to Ukraine, and whether that had some meaning that, now Aliyev was in Moscow at the time that all this was coming down with the recognition of the two separatist regions. I just don't know how President Aliyev justifies a relationship with Putin who's recognized separatist regions in another country with which Azerbaijan has diplomatic relations. Even Kazakhstan spoke out opposing that step that Putin took. I have not seen anything that would suggest that Azerbaijan has spoken out, and again, the optics of it totally undercuts the position that Azerbaijan has been asserting about the rest of Nagorno-Karabakh, where the Russian peacekeeping operation is centered. And I think one thing to really watch in the next few weeks, I've never believed that peacekeeping operation was temporary. I thought the Russians, in Karabakh, I thought the Russians, having achieved again something that they hadn't been able to achieve in any other way, we're going to maintain that military presence. I just think the events of the last 48 hours underscore the fact that Russia will maintain that military presence, and may decide the future of what remains, whatever we call that that region that still isn't under Azerbaijan control in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a separatist region, and at any moment, Putin could decide to recognize that independence as well. So it's not a, how shall I put it? The agreement I don't see as being particularly helpful in terms of the Azerbaijan position on Karabakh.
One of the worrying articles of this declaration is about the military assistance. And it says that in cases when security and peace is threatened, the sides can seek each other's help. What do you think cases will fall under this security and peace threat? And in which scenarios do you think this assistance may be requested? Is it
yeah, hard to say. I mean, the first thought that came to mind was, and again, totally different circumstances, and Kazakhstan's a member of CSTO and Azerbaijan isn't, but you know, the imposition of quote, peacekeepers, unquote, into Kazakhstan after the civil disorders there, you know, earlier this year, I could see that would be a situation where if there were, you know, civil disorders or renewed fighting with Armenia, that Azerbaijan might want to use that provision to request Russian help. I also think that if Azerbaijan's relationship in the military area gets too strong with third parties, and I'm thinking particularly Turkey and Israel, that Russia might object under the terms of this agreement to expansion of those relationships. So another, you know, potential sacrifice of Azerbaijan sovereignty if the Russians would use it in that way.
So, in other words, even though Azerbaijan is not part of the CSTO, but the government can enjoy similar advantages to use as in Kazakhstan scenario in case of civil disorder or public protests.
That would be one possibility, I think.
Now, what do you think the government of Azerbaijan gains from that? I mean, it's a big deal, isn't it?
Right. Well, you know, if you looked at it just in a very narrow sense, it would be a way of, you know, preserving the regime in Baku in the same way that the regime in Astara was preserved in Kazakhstan. I don't know beyond that if there's any benefit. I just can't imagine, you know, after the events of Black Monday, that the people of Azerbaijan would welcome again, you know, Russian, Soviet. I don't know that there's any difference today, but Russian troops, you know, on the streets of Baku to put down a civil disorder. So, you know, I think it would be more, you know, specific to how threatened the, you know, the current regime felt, whether that provision would be of an advantage. Otherwise, you know, I just think it would be very, very dangerous, I think, to imagine how the public you know, would react to that kind of military presence if it was simply, you know, a decision of the Azerbaijan leadership without any support from consultation with the people of Azerbaijan.
At the same time, we hear similar accusations by Azerbaijan's government, similar to Putin's accusations that as if United States and collective West is behind some colored revolution,
right.
That colored revolutions will not be tolerated, that they're trying to use terrorists and so on and so forth to throw down the government, topple down the government. What do you think of this? I mean, what is going on, and what? Mm-hmm.
You know, I found that all rather interesting, given the fact that Ramiz Mektiev now apparently is removed from his official position at the Academy of Sciences. Back in 2014, issued in his name was a polemic, my words, a polemic, which basically said, you know, the West, the US have been trying to undermine Azerbaijan for years. We can only count on Russia. You know, before before Soros became a particular target, reference to what media from the West supporting independent media in Azerbaijan, non-government organizations from the West supporting political party and other non-government organizations in Azerbaijan. That whole argument was kind of framed back in December of 2014, and I wrote a piece for Brookings in at that time that basically said that the Haydar Aliyev era was over, that there was a new era now. Haydar Aliyev, succeeded by balancing the various interests of Azerbaijan against Russia, Iran, the U.S., and the West, and did it in a way that played to Azerbaijan's national interests. But now there was a clear sense that there was a break with that, particularly the relationship with the West, and now the only true friend of Azerbaijan was going to be Russia. So that was a number of years ago, and it you look at the arguments as they were presented over the last few months. At least I noticed them in the last few months. They were kind of the same arguments that Mekhtiev pointed to, but more specifically attacking Soros, which is a Moscow line, attacking the National Endowment for Democracy, which I've been trying to figure out what is the particular problem that NED has caused, either in terms of support for non-government organizations, but neither Soros nor NED nor the U.S. government has any interest in colored revolutions in Azerbaijan. This is all it's all a creation, of people who are seeking to justify a closer relationship with Russia, and I think that's the troubling development here.
Thank you for bringing up 2014 Ramiz Mehdiev's editorial piece. And just for our audience who doesn't know who Ramiz Mehdiev is, he was the head of the president's administration for over 24 years. And until recently, he was holding the position of the president of the Academy of Sciences, as well as the member of the National Security Council, which he still continues to hold. But he resigned from his position and a couple of days before President Ilham Aliyev's visit to Russia. Now, interestingly, the very rhetoric, the narrative, fifth column, for instance, Ramiz Mehdiev was the very first one to bring this, and back in 2014, calling all the NGOs, independent journalists, lawyers, right defenders as a fifth column. And accusing them in organizing a revolution. And after that editorial, a series of arrests took place in Azerbaijan, a large-scale crackdown on dissent voices, arrests of prominent journalists, lawyers, and right defenders, and others. Now, interestingly, that narrative recently has been used by President Ilham Aliyev himself. He sacks or accepts resignation, to put it to say more correctly. So he sends to Ramiz Mehdiev into retirement, and instead uses that narrative himself, that fifth column, Soros, colored revolution. What do you think is going on there?
Well, and this is speculation on my part, okay? I don't think that President Aliyev has gotten over the fact that President Biden did not invite him to this summit of the democracies earlier this year in Washington. And Biden did invite Armenia. So, I think this is seen by Aliyev as kind of a personal affront. And that the reason this didn't happen was because behind the scenes in Washington, the famous NGOs, the Freedom House, NED, and so forth were working to dirty the name of Azerbaijan as a non-democracy. So I think that really bothered. I think it bothered him. And this idea of making this point before this youth gathering. Now, maybe there were other venues where he was making the same points, but the one that I noticed was at the youth. The idea that he was going to protect the youth from these evil influences from the West and from the Soros Foundation. You're exactly right. It's the stock of the message of Ramiz Mekdiev that he now has taken over. There is no, as far as I can tell, there's no effort, even of a cosmetic nature, to portray either himself or Azerbaijan as moving in a direction of a Western-oriented, market-based economy, based on freedom of expression and observance of human rights. I mean, that all is just ripped away, and so we see the real image, which is the image of kleptocracy, the image of autocracy, the image of not caring what anybody outside thinks about this kind of behavior. So it's sad for Azerbaijan to see this happen 30 years. After those glorious days when everyone, Azerbaijanis and non-Azerbaijanis alike, hoped that Azerbaijan would be moving, in a direction. It is a troubling development.
2/22/22. Second day of the week. President Biden here that day often started his press conference also at 2/22. But we know that it is really a big deal in Russia. In fact, the Declaration on Allied Cooperation was also signed on that very day, 2/22/22. Interestingly, the opposition parliamentarian Zhirinovsky, well known,
Yes.
has been forecasting, has been saying even back in December last year that wait till 2022, you will see there will be big beginning for Russia, big day, big historic day for Russia. So how would you characterize this day? I mean, what is it that Kremlin is trying to do? What is this theory around 2/22/22? I mean, is it just an attempt to save its face now that conditions were not met or ultimatum has not been met? Is it really after larger military operations like that it can lead to World War or larger full-scale military confrontation, or is he after restoring CIS or United Soviet Union in some form? What is your take on that?
Oh my! There's so many people in Washington, who, in some cases, really are experts. Both of the history and contemporary developments, who are trying to interpret this. And I guess I would start out by saying that, what 2/22 revealed is not a leader who is advancing the interest of, in this case, his country, but as a personality who he alone makes the decisions, moved by forces that no one outside can understand. This crisis was manufactured by Vladimir Putin. and predicting what he will do next is not possible, I don't think. I think two things that did happen on 2/22 or around that time. One was this very, very strange meeting of the Russian National Security Council. And then, Putin's speech, which, I I have not seen a text of it. I've seen, video summaries of it, but it was not the speech of a confident leader with a clear agenda. It was a speech of an emotional, almost at times, disconnected from reality individual. He lives in his own cocoon, and therefore the idea that you can reach him through others in the structures in Moscow is not going to happen. You get to Biden, you talk to foreign minister, secretary of defense of the United States, and they can get authoritative information from him. Not the case in Russia with Putin. So I don't know what's going to happen next. I think Russia is not in a good place. I don't think Putin's in a good place, because everything that he wanted to achieve, in terms of splitting NATO, of showing the United States as lacking purpose and leadership, has been proven wrong. And what he has started with the recognition of these separatist regions and the military incursions that have gone on now, I don't know how he carries this out. And these sanctions, again, we've not seen the full extent of them, but they are going after the money of the kleptocrats, directly or indirectly affiliated with Putin, and that's going to be very, 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 very uncomfortable for them. So this is a dangerous time. We just, his actions are unpredictable. They're not the sort of thing that you can negotiate with, because in my personal view, his objective is to, break up NATO. As I said, he has not succeeded in that. And I think he does have this idea that, whether you call it the near abroad, the former FSU, the CIS, or former Soviet Union, he wants to recreate a Russian-dominated system where what are now independent countries are no longer independent. And he wants to be, he wants to lead that. So I'm not sure who that makes him, the new czar or Stalin, or, I'm not sure. Going back in history is very, very helpful. But yeah, I just think now is just a horrible time to try to figure out what's going to happen next. And he will act in irrational and disconnected to reality ways.
You were ambassador to Azerbaijan. If you were asked today by the U.S. administration about U.S. policy in Azerbaijan, what would you advise, especially after this declaration on allied cooperation with Russia? Is it something that, what do you make of it? Is it something that Azerbaijan wants, the people want? Is it what the government wants? How should it affect, do you think, the U.S.-Azerbaijan relations now that this declaration is signed?
Well, on the one hand, it's a bilateral declaration between our agreement between Azerbaijan and Russia, and we're not a party to it, and therefore, until there's actually some steps that are taken that affect U.S. interests, I think we just acknowledge that it happened. I think where the problem is going to arise is the longer the crisis with Russia continues over Ukraine, and let's say even if there is an additional military action, the sanctions regime that we and our European allies are putting in place will have repercussions on other countries. And so one of the things that the U.S. is going to have to be very careful about is do you in your pursuit of these sanctions against Russia, do you want to harm other countries, or can you minimize the danger? So I think that would be one set of issues. I think the human rights situation in Azerbaijan should be another one, totally independent of the agreement. But there's been just an increase in the pressure against people in the opposition, against independent media, arresting young people, bloggers. The oppression goes on, and I think one thing that the U.S. is going to be doing is making both in Azerbaijan and other countries much more of the human rights issue. And the last thing, and this is one part that I am troubled by, given this agreement, is what happens with the Minsk Group process. Not the one with Ukraine, but the one, involving Armenia, Azerbaijan, France, Russia, and the U.S. Will there be an effort by Russia to kind of finally destroy that and take over responsibility for brokering, relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan? I don't know. If the Minsk Group goes away, I think that, and it goes away because Azerbaijan and Armenia agree to it. I think it puts both those countries totally at the mercy of Russia to decide what the future relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan will be. And as I said, there's still that area where the Russian peacekeepers are present, that at any moment Putin could decide, as he did with the case of Ukraine, that he's going to recognize that entity as independent. So, I mean, those are the things that I would watch for in terms of U.S. Azerbaijan relations.
Well, again, this year, in fact, this month, there's going to be 30th anniversary of U.S.-Azerbaijan relations, and the United States was one of the first countries that recognized independence of Azerbaijan. I still remember James Baker, U.S. State Secretary's visit in Azerbaijan. I was there at the airport.
It was a very short visit.
Yes, but very important visit. He came from Yerevan, and it was the day when, the beginning of the diplomatic relations between the two countries. Again, a lot to celebrate, and so looking back.
And there are a lot of Americans and Azerbaijanis who can take credit for starting basically at ground zero in terms of a relationship and making that into something. I'm thinking particularly of Robert Finn and Philip Remler and Dick Miles, who was our first ambassador in Baku, and how they lived and worked from the old Intourist hotel building, and they just, under difficult circumstances, they established a diplomatic presence and began the process of support for Azerbaijan independence and sovereignty. And that was 30 years ago, and that same principle is still at play. And that's why, at least I'm sensitive when I see things that I think takes away from that sovereignty of Azerbaijan, which is so important for an independent country. So there are a lot of people who worked very hard, and as I say, both Azerbaijanis and and Americans in those early days to, to support that goal for Azerbaijan.
Ambassador Richard Kozlers, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.